While I talk on Philly Pressbox Radio every Wednesday, my real job is doing business news for Compass Media Networks, where I get to interview reporters from various media outlets about stories they've written, and then turn those interviews into a segment on one of our network programs. And I thought this one was both different and, well, sort of interesting. A chat with the Wall Street Journal's Jacob Gallagher about fishing fashion. I kid you not. He told me that fishing shirts and vests from Columbia Sportswear and other companies, and fishing itself actually, have really grown in popularity in recent years since the pandemic hit about 3.5 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to note that fishing broadly is really having this moment that began during the pandemic and has not really crested since. You know, looking at kind of people spending time outside. You know, we saw this with hiking. We saw this with rock climbing. We saw this with all those outdoor pursuits that really had a surge at a time when people didn't want to be indoors. And what has happened is, you know, a lot of people that started those activities, some of them have stopped, some of them got back to their normal lives, but some of them have continued, and people that were not into fishing previously are into fishing. People that were into fishing are now more into it. So we're seeing an increase, you know, compared to 5-6 years ago with the number of people that are fishing based on the statistics that we're seeing. In terms of the kind of knock-on effect of that, there's obviously fishing is one of those pursuits that you kind of fall into, and then all of a sudden you're buying $1,000 waders, and you're buying all these fancy rods, and you're buying, you know, Japanese fly fishing reels. You're kind of, you can easily fall into this gear hole, so to speak, with it. And this is true for a lot of things. You know, look at people buying expensive Yeti coolers for their hiking trips. You know, people like buying gear ultimately. And with fishing, I think we are seeing that effect of the people that are interested in it. There's more of them, and a large sliver of them kind of do really want to try to wear their hobby, to spend money on their hobby. And we're really seeing that in the fishing gear that's being sold.
Yeah, you just alluded to it. Many of these fishing shirts and vests are actually made by prominent fashion labels, and they can be rather pricey, correct?
Yeah, you know, when you're looking at the quote-unquote fashion fishing stuff, and it's important to note some of the brands that make that stuff, it is really being designed to be worn fishing. You know, there's a Japanese brand, South 2 West 8, that is probably the highest end, the most premium of the fishing brands. And that brand is really all about fishing. And people really do fish in that gear, but it can be, you know, several $100s for a vest. It can be several $100s for a hat. It can get up to 4 figures for jackets. And that is an interesting kind of fashionification of fishing gear. At the same time, we're also seeing kind of the influence of fishing, the same way things like skateboarding often influence fashion. Fishing is now influencing fashion, and we're seeing kind of brands pluck certain attributes, the fishing vest, the kind of the quote-unquote fisherman sandal, those things that bespeak being outdoors, bespeak kind of reeling in some fish, even though you wouldn't really be able to do it with this gear. You know, Prada made this vest that looks an awful lot like a average fishing vest you'd find at a Bass Pro Shop, and yet it's probably going to be several $1,000s. I don't think anyone will really fish in that, but it kind of evokes the influence of fishing.
So what if you do want to get some of these items, but you don't want to spend that kind of money? Are there more budget-conscious options?
Well, this really speaks to this kind of interesting thing in fashion right now, that we're seeing all trends seem to be able to kind of hit 2 marketplaces here, where they're hitting the high fashion space, those $1,000 fishing vests, as I mentioned, but they're also simultaneously, there's a more economical, savvier consumer that might be going for that vintage fishing gear on Depop or on eBay and might be spending $10, $15 for a fishing vest and getting a similar look at a much more affordable price. Because there is so much authentic fishing gear that's out there, you have vintage dealers that specialize it, and you have people that are really finding bargains for it.
Just curious, Jacob, might we catch you in some of these trendy fishing shirts or vests?
I was wondering if anyone was going to ask me this. I have never fished in my life. I am a tried and true urbanite. I have a lot of friends that actually did start fishing during the pandemic. I'm always interested in it. It is certainly not for me, though, I don't think. I much prefer being dry.
There you go, Bill.
Well, Chet, I tell you somebody who will like that, for sure, if no one else did. Bob Sullivan will like that. Bob's a fisherman. He loves to fish.
And my buddy Denny also. Denny, from Western Maryland, he loves to fish.
There you go. Well, Chet, you're all over the place, and that's a good one too.
Yeah, I thought, hey, what the heck, something different. Have you gone fishing? Because I went twice in my life, and I was like 12 years old. It was like twice, 2 months apart when I was 12 or 13. That was it.
I've never gone deep sea fishing. Went fishing a couple times with my dad as a kid out, but not what I would call deep sea fishing.
I went with an uncle and a cousin. Yeah, it was not deep sea fishing. It was, from the shore or whatever you want to call it. And I was there about 5 minutes and I caught a foot-long catfish. So
there you go.
That was
my father-in-law loved to fish, and he used to take all of our boys fishing, as he could, and it was pretty cool.